There are three things I want to do today. First off is to essentially summarize what you've heard from the last 2 days in terms of um, the the status of all the work streams. Essentially, what we've had is a readout of all the work streams and a statement of where they want to go next. So I'm just going to summarize that in a little dashboard I put together and talk about the process that each work stream goes through from initial conception through to incorporation into the core release. And once we've done that, I want to take a look at the new roadmap, talk about where we are now and where we expect to be over the next PI and beyond. The product council attendees have already seen the new roadmap, and a couple of minor changes were made after that product council session, but essentially it's an evolution of what you've seen before, if you've seen it before. And once we've done that, I want to have a session where we can talk about what's missing from the roadmap. What do adopters and our go-to-market team and our developers and integrators, what are they seeing on the ground that's missing from the roadmap? And can we spend a little time perhaps clarifying those requirements? And we have a couple of mechanisms for that. We can discuss it in an open session. There's also a Miro board where people can just put their requirements on post-it notes if they're more comfortable doing it that way. And we'll distill some new input to the evolution of the roadmap. Okay, moving right on, I'm going to just bring up the Workstream dashboard. Actually, before that, so I think what I'm going to do is share this, and I'm just going to show you this. I want to emphasize that all the stuff that I'm going to talk about today is available in the Product Council repo on the Mojaloop GitHub. If you have a look, this is the link, github.com Mojaloop Product Council. And within that, we have a couple of sections you should be aware of. The statement of the cross-border vision, which is still awaiting adoption. We have the archives for all of the product council meetings there. So there's the transcripts of all the meetings, links to video recordings, etc. And we have a roadmap as well. And in here, you will see both the current version of the roadmap here, and there's also the Mojaloop pillars, which you're all familiar with. I won't bore you with them yet again. Going back up to the product council section itself, at the top, you'll see the Workstream dashboard stored in PDF format, because I'm afraid we can't cope with just anyone changing it. So everything that I'm going to talk about today is in that repo. So feel free to go back there and look at it yourself if you want to refer back to it. Okay, moving on to the dashboard then. This is not presenting anything new. This is my distillation of what you've heard over the last couple of days. So I'll just put it in presentation mode. Right, so just first of all, to go through what we've defined as the 7 phases of a Mojaloop workstream. And this is going to be formalized somewhat in the new DA charter as well. This is how we expect a workstream to progress. So from initial conception, which leads to a product requirements definition, after convening where we identify new requirements, the product council members define the product level requirements that the workstream is intended to address. So what's it for? What's the justification, etc. And the first thing that we do from there is develop a backlog for an MVP or a pilot deployment. So not the full development backlog, but the bits that you need to do in order to get started and to get a proof of concept out there. and it has to be put in the Mojaloop GitHub. It can be in its own repo, but within the Mojaloop GitHub. Once there is an overall design, that then must be presented to the design authority for review, and the DA may well suggest changes, and once they've been suggested, the sponsors of that workstream have to consider those suggestions and perhaps modify or add to the backlog. Then when at some point when we reach a reasonable degree of development, development in progress is actually something which runs right the way through, I should say. But the production backlog has to come along after the MVP backlog. So how do we need to extend the MVP backlog to make it suitable for use in a full production deployment? And again, that has to be defined in the Mojaloop GitHub. Development is underway, is an element of the workstream that goes right the way through. It first uses the MVP backlog, and then once that has reached a certain level of completion, it moves on to the expanded production-specific backlog items. And then at some point, the workstream's outputs are ready for use in a pilot or proof of concept, with limited attention to considerations of capacity or reliability. So essentially, it's suitable for use in a non-production environment just to prove that this is meeting the initial product requirements. And then finally, we reach a point where it is ready for a live production service. So those are the 7 phases, and they are used as the basis of the workstream dashboard. So moving on to that. This is the dashboard itself as currently envisaged, and this was reviewed with all the workstream leads and at product council. So I would urge people to check that they're happy with it. It's effectively a statement of where we are. I can't see anything because of the list of, there we go, get rid of that. Okay, so the 7 phases are across the top, and down the left-hand side we have all the work streams. Some of them split out because for reasons which I hope came apparent over the last couple of days. So the symbols here are a full circle is complete, a half circle is it's in progress, an empty circle is not yet begun, and grey circles are used for where a phase is not relevant to a particular work stream. So the participation tools workstream, for example, our first subject here, the product requirements have been defined in some detail. An MVP backlog has been completed, but this workstream hasn't really progressed beyond that. It hasn't been submitted to the DA for review. There is no production backlog. Nobody's actually started any development work there. And we cannot anticipate this being ready for MVP before the end of the next PI. And maybe it'll be ready for live service, the PI after that. So that's a relatively incomplete one. A more advanced one is something like merchant payments, where the product requirements have been defined, the MVP backlog has been completed, it's been reviewed by the DA. The production backlog is in progress, not yet completed. The development is in progress, it's ready for a proof of concept, and we can imagine that once a proof of concept has been carried out, it'll be ready for a live service in PI 25. And probably the most incomplete of our work streams here is the proxies for PAPS and TCIB, where we've only really just begun to define the product requirements, and everything else is still very much up in the air. And that's okay, because we don't really need that urgently. By contrast, the multi-scheme or inter-scheme workstream is one that we're going to need fairly urgently, and it has begun. So the product requirements are defined. The MVP backlog has at least been begun. The DA review, there's been an initial DA review, but it can't be said to be complete. The production backlog hasn't been started and development hasn't been started. And this is an issue because we know that it needs to be available for pilots fairly soon, certainly by the mid of PI 25. And it is likely it needs to be available in production, actually at the end of PI 25 or the beginning of PI 26. So I won't go through every single one. The last ones I'll mention are the ones at the bottom, where we have performance optimization, platform quality and security, and core and releases. And these are different because these work streams are the ones that we expect to run forever. We will always be optimizing the performance. We will always be evaluating the security of the platform. We will always be making new releases. So for these, you can see we bring in the not applicable blob. So development of the MVP backlog, production backlog, ready for pilot, ready for live service. They're just not relevant to those work streams. So before I go on, I think I've been seeing things in the chat. Are there any questions I need to address? Does anyone want to raise a question? I can't see the questions if there are any.
Paul, there are no questions, but well, there is now one. Miller, go ahead.
Greetings, Paul.
Hi.
On the last three, performance optimization, platform quality and security, and core and releases, I can understand how those might be integrated, as Sam has described yesterday, into the release work. But I think performance optimization and certainly platform quality and security will include not just the work we do during the release cycle, but there may also be backlog that forms now and then, either reactively to work on the previous many lines of work that have impacted those things that now needs correction, or it may be that there is work that is ongoing that requires community assistance and help, in which case a backlog would form.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing that I'm not sure why these would be entirely eccentric to your process otherwise. And it does make it maybe a little more difficult for us to figure out as a community how to engage with that work if we're not sure. If we show up and say, where's the backlog? I just want to work on something and there's nothing there. That feels a bit excluding. So just an initial reaction to this. I'm not sure that matters in the end.
No, Miller, I think you're right. I think it's possibly I need to find a better way of representing it, because those, certainly the first two, absolutely always have a backlog, but it's a continuous backlog rather than one that at some point comes to an end. So there is always ongoing work on performance, for example.
I think that's right, and that's given that it's a work stream, we would integrate the people who are coming in or becoming available through the backlog to see whether they want to engage with the work, or if they believe something needs doing and they see that it's not on the backlog, they might want to engage with that work stream and say, hey, I noticed something, here's probably something we should work on. So maybe there is a better way to represent those ongoing things. I get the
like
ready for
backlog.
MVP. Yeah, right. But I mean, at the end, ready for live service. Well, at all times.
Yes, it's true. It's true. There is no fixed date, was the thinking, because it is continuous.
I think so. Always. I think looks like there's a note from Godfrey. Maybe he wants to jump on here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Miller.
Thanks, Miller. And okay. Thanks, Miller. Oh, just from a previous kind of like slides that you articulated in terms of the process flow, it was just something that I've observed in the past, that often when we get to the DA, we're still kind of like talking about requirements. So is there any plan just to make sure that we kind of like align the two processes and avoiding slow down the DA design approval? I'm not sure if it's still the case. I haven't been in the DA for quite a while now, but I just want to make sure that I bring it up so that we don't slow down this process.
I wouldn't expect it to slow down the process. I mean, James has been in charge of redesigning that particular element of the process. James, do you want to say anything at this point?
Yeah, well, there are likely to be some upcoming changes to the DA charter in the coming weeks. I don't want to preempt that too much, but we are planning to introduce some structures and framework around that review. That will mean there's a definite process with deadlines and clearly communicated schedule for running through design reviews. So in the past, it's been very open. We are planning to tighten up. I don't want to preempt too much what's like to be said in the
Thank you, James. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight the fact that that is under consideration, and we are alive to the issue that Godfrey's raising.
But thanks, Paul and James.
Are there any other comments on the dashboard? Are there any concerns here?
A minor nitpick, Paul. Instead of keeping it gray, I would have liked to see it completely blue to show that it's always actually for the last.
Yes. Yes. As per Miller's comment, perhaps make it continuous rather than yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Because I was trying to emphasize the fact that it's something that never ends. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
This is a great thing, especially for people like me and like-minded people as well. This is a fantastic view. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Paul,
Okay.
I'm curious if any of the workstream leads have any comments on their particular status here.
They were given the opportunity and they were asked at product council as well, and nobody said anything.
Okay. That's fine. Karim has a comment. Karim, do you want to vocalize your comment? Karim? We can't hear you, Karim, but Karim says mic issues. I'll give you a second, Karim.
While waiting for Karim, Simeon, maybe out of curiosity, what is localization, time zone, Workstream about?
That's simply about whereas the core records all transactions against the UTC time zone, it may be that a hub operator and the participating DFSPs want to use a local time zone in all of their communications to avoid any confusion. So that's simply that.
Got it. In language?
Language, well, there's no reason why the portals should all be in English. It's common that we have a requirement for French, and don't imagine that Burmese would be useful for Myanmar, for example.
And if I could maybe jump in briefly on this, they're actually we're shortening this down a little bit to make it simple. There are two different pieces of work. One of them is called internationalization. The other is localization, and those are not the same work. Internationalization is being sure the system can communicate throughout UTC. Localization is saying that certain aspects of the system can be localized to current time zone. Other aspects of the system, maybe not. Same thing on language. Internationalization means that we're using the right Unicode code page so that we can then, in a local area like Myanmar, utilize the Burmese glyphs that are not available if you use the wrong Unicode code page. So there's two parts to it: internationalization, which makes it ready so that you can localize, and then localize to the specific areas. And so I would say that we might want to clarify this somewhat. I don't see there needs to be additional work streams necessarily. We're driving a lot of this work off of the local need, but it's something to bear in mind that those really are actually separate pieces of work. One of which the internationalization could be quite extensive, whereas localization might, as you say, Paul, be limited to portals and things. But it has to be taken in context, I think.
Yes, you're right. We are trying to limit the scope to localization precisely because it is the less complex option, and it actually, I think, meets our requirements, at least as currently envisaged.
Well, but to be clear, you have to do both. You can't actually just do localization. Otherwise, you end up with an unsupportable set of patches that make it possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think there does need to be an internationalization strategy, which might be thin. It might say that there are certain aspects of the system that are simply always in UTC, for example, and can never be localized, like message passing is always in UTC. But then there may be cases where in the ISO translator, we're required to use local time zones. I don't know this. I'm just making something up as I go along here. Likewise, in the language side of it, many jurisdictions may not care about particular language changes on their portals. They'll use English, but that other jurisdictions may do require it. But if we simply did this as translation, and we didn't do the work in internationalization to make that possible, it's a ton of work for each different locale. There's no
absolutely
sharing.
Yes. I think it's absolutely right that we have to do that internationalization piece, and then it's simply a matter of localizing on
I think
a
that's right.
per deployment basis. That's the sensible way forward. I completely agree.
I think that's right. I don't know quite how to capture it, given that the work will be pulled through these two work streams for a real outcome. But anyway, just a comment on that point, that those are really two separate things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mo. Kareem.
Yeah, hi. So can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I had put a comment on the chat which was about, so when we say something is ready for live service, right now, probably our definition is that the code release process, which is defined earlier in the convening and previous presentations, which runs certain types of automated security tool checks, like Dependabot or vulnerability checks like SonarQube or anything like that. So those are the security checks which we are doing as part of the release. But like as we are aiming for more and more deployments moving beyond POCs, I mean, my sense is that, when we are releasing a product, generally when we are developing software in the same financial industry, the vulnerability analysis is one thing, and then penetration testing is the another thing. Now, I know like each work stream may not have experts in the security domain who can do PT, but if every work stream is generating certain amount of code and which is being made part of Mojaloop release, then there has to be a process of doing penetration testing on those components. So it's simply moving beyond the vulnerability analysis, which is fairly, I would say, the basic stage of security testing. And that will build more confidence among the adopters. So that was my take. I don't know how that can be done. I mean, it's a full-time work, but it's an area which came to my mind when I saw ready for live service. So that's what I thought about it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Kareem. Something that we need to introduce almost as a gate before we can say it's ready for live service. I quite agree. We need to document that. I can't see. Nobody else got their hand.
I'll be happy to continue that discussion on the platform quality and security workstream as we kick off the discussions for
I was about to pass that off to you, Sam. I think it is very much squarely within your domain there. Yes.
Yeah, and I've discussed this yesterday. So we've
Mhm.
taken one part that we thought is ready for testing. It's not penetration testing, but a thorough security review. And we have a team that volunteered to do that from Scilab, and they've also volunteered for two other things. But at the time, I thought we were not ready for it. But in this PI, we want to do the stress testing, which builds on the performance work that was done. But we can discuss penetration testing. We have some concerns about penetration testing, the open source software as such. We'll discuss that internally. But yeah, let's continue that discussion on the work stream. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Sam. Are there any other
Yeah.
questions before I move on from this?
Yeah, maybe just to add to the tail end of that discussions around the security review for Go Live. Potentially, we could actually bring it a little bit more forward where during the product requirements definition, security requirements could be defined there. And same through the DA review, so that whatever has been built as security requirement, the DA can check if it's been built into the design. Then, before Go Live will be the third review, just to make sure that, everything that has been planned is being implemented, and just to check for anything potentially new. But yeah, I think behind the scene, I'm happy to contribute to that.
Please do, Godfrey.
Yeah.
It
The
sounds
second
almost as
point
though
was around. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry for cutting you.
I was going to say, it sounds as though there needs to be some synchronization between the DA and the PQS workstream on this. Maybe we could
Yeah,
perhaps
definitely.
formalize that slightly. Yeah. Your second
Yeah,
point,
the
Godfrey?
same the same second, point around synchronization. I see it potentially between the proxies, multi-scheme, and ISO. And just to make sure that maybe we could hit, multiple beds with one stone. So when we do multi-scheme, we could consider it, to say, can it ISO be a standardized way of doing it? And the same can actually have a replica effect on how you should approach TCB and pass integration. Just a comment, just for those who are involved with the work stream, would consider that, or maybe it could be common people just to make sure that they can, sing from the same hymn board.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can I perhaps address these comments, if that's okay?
Please, Julie.
And sorry, Miller, I see you have your hands raised and I jump in the queue. So I basically like we separate the three for a reason. And reason is like multi-scheme, inter-scheme. For now, the focus is actually on connecting different Mojaloop instances. And for proxy and proxy for PAPS and TCIB, the purpose is actually like interoperability with non-Mojaloop system, right? And under this work stream, the idea is to test whether the multi-scheme approach that we have can actually work for a non-Mojaloop instance. And we know already that there will be decisions that needs to be made around what is our vision for interoperability and where do we want to break the flow. ISO is a separate work stream because we're introducing new standard that will impact technically all the various work stream, right? So I expect merchant payment will be impacted and so on. So that's why
Yes.
it needs to stay separate. I hope it addressed your comment and explain a bit more why it's three different work stream as opposed to a combined one or two.
Yes, thank you, Julie. That was the synergies between those work streams were the ones we discussed over the last couple of days, certainly. But spoken like a great work stream lead. Thank you. Millie, you had your hand up.
And Julie has handily not only helped with my comments, but taken us further here. So thank you. I was suggesting only that we could look at perhaps combining PAPS and TCIB, a portion of that with multi-scheme. But as she's pointed out, they really are largely separate things because of the aspect of Mojaloop versus non-Mojaloop. And I was suggesting that ISO really is eccentric to either of those things because it's a largely outward-facing process that has to, we're driven by the ISO community on that, and it will influence almost everything else that we do. So, but anyway, I think Julie covered it well. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, there is a build between some of these work streams. So multi-scheme is the enabler for many of the others. It builds in the essential infrastructure to allow us to essentially interoperate across multiple schemes. Initially, other Mojaloops, and then TCIB coming after that, and ISO general ISO 222 generalizes beyond that. So, in my mind, it is a build, if you like. Kareem, you have your hand.
Yeah, just context. So multi-scheme, obviously we decided as a work stream that we are focusing right now on Mojaloop, two
Yes.
Mojaloop schemes communicating with each other, just to make sure that we start with a simple combination. We don't solve for everything.
It's the simple step. Yes, the
As
first
a
step.
first step. But this, like looking at PEPs and TCIB, because I was participating in that work stream also,
Yes.
what they offer us is a kind of a guiding point that when we are talking about Mojaloop supporting multi-schemes, eventually, obviously the goal is that we could have a Mojaloop and non-Mojaloop payment systems also talking to each other. And in that scenario, PEPs and TCIB offer both like a good test case that PEPs follows a slightly different transaction flow, and TCIB follows what we are generally looking at between two Mojaloop schemes. Because in TCIB, the sender scheme, receiving a scheme is actually once they respond back to a transfer request, then they are completing the transfer and not waiting for a further notification. Whereas PEPs is slightly different. So it would be like at some point when multi-scheme work is like through the DA review and progressed further, it would be important that we extend the scope of multi-scheme to non-Mojaloop scheme integrations.
Well, yes, agreed. But we don't need to do the work now. Leave it to the individual work streams.
Can I also address perhaps this, if that's okay? Like again, I think like for me, we are looking at very different timelines here. For multi-scheme, inter-scheme, like it will be live at the end of the next PI. For proxy, for PAPs and TCIB, we have the luxury to take a bit more time because as mentioned yesterday, there is no immediate need from any adopters. So that's why, like, yes, the two are definitely related, and I called this out yesterday that proxy for PAPs and TCIB depend on multi-scheme, but I do feel that potentially what would happen under multi-scheme, again, to be confirmed, only time will tell, right? But potentially what would happen is effectively that after the first go live, we may have extra requirements that are urgently need to be addressed. And in this case, we will address them under multi-scheme. I mean, again, for now, this is just an assumption. And I would say something like we have in mind, just to make sure the deployment is secure and successful. So I think just for this, because again, we are looking at different timelines, I think it makes sense to keep both separate.
And I would agree, Julie. PAPs and TCIB is at least a PI further on. So we have the luxury of time in that regard. Michael, you raised your hand.
Oh, thanks. I just wanted to go back to a point that I think both Kareem and Godfrey made, and say, to repeat something which I said on Tuesday, which is it's the intention that the multi-scheme work should not, it should be agnostic as to whether the schemes that are being connected are Mojaloop schemes or non-Mojaloop schemes. I mean, that's one of the intentions of its design. And if it really turns out that it's assuming one or the other of those, then I think we will have failed.
Yes, I think it's rather in general, I agree. That's the whole point of this structure. I think there's an element of what's the phrase? Trainer wheels. Essentially, try and do it in a benign environment to begin with, and generalize the design from the start, but the implementation is limited to begin with. That was my always my view of this.
So I think that there are very important issues around the closeness of messages and indeed message flows between schemes. And I don't want to minimize those. And I certainly want to say that it's very important that we get in any given implementation the best answer to those questions. But my point is that that's a separate question from the way in which Mojaloop in general supports inter-scheme. That is intended, as I say, to be entirely agnostic to whether the schemes that are being connected are Mojaloop schemes or non-Mojaloop schemes.
Okay, I agree with that principle entirely. Yes.
Then my work here is done.
Okay, so we'll move on. This discussion is a little longer than I thought, but that's good. I'm very happy with that. Please don't assume that I'm not. Let's move on directly to the roadmap now. And this is far too small for you to see, I know. But the point of this to begin with is to just give people an overview, and then we can dive into some detail. So across the top, we have our Mojaloop releases. And as you can see, we have 2 releases in this current PI, though I actually think they're going to shift right somewhat. This here, this line, is today. So it's the end of PI 24 and the beginning of PI 25. Here, this is pillar 1, make adoption easier. Won't show you the pillars yet again. Pillar 2 is about achieving scale, and that's the work streams that we have in that pillar. Pillar 3, connect to other systems. That's all of these work streams. Pillar, and then underneath that, of course, is the foundation, which is the quality product, and that's all of these work streams. And at the bottom, the strategic work streams, which as I've said many times before, these strategic work streams are intended to spin off to a work stream within one of the pillars in the future. But at the moment, they are just general strategic thinking. You'll notice that previous versions of the roadmap had 5 here. That's collapsed down because 4 of them have actually spawned work streams in the higher pillars. So their strategic content has ended and they've become actual technical work streams. And there is a new one, which I'll come to in a minute. So if I start to zoom in a little on this now, so you can actually read it. On the Mojaloop releases at the top, you'll see this is Mojaloop Zambezi, which we're about to release. It was expected to be sooner than this, but there's been a series of minor but irritating issues which have delayed it somewhat. I've tried here to indicate what is within that release. So Mojaloop 16.1 Zambezi has performance enhancements, improved release automation, quality and platform quality and security enhancements, and some security patches, and the additional features outside the core are merchant payments. We expect Mojaloop 17 Irrawaddy to come along fairly soon, and that includes in the core support for FX, performance enhancements and maintenance fixes. There may be other things, but that's what's envisaged at the moment. And the additional features are the G2P support for MOSIP, etc. Further down the line, we are anticipating by sometime within PI 25, Mojaloop Limpopo version 18, which will include within the core next generation settlement, upgrades to PISP, multi-scheme support, time zone localization, and of course maintenance fixes. And we are also expecting enhancements to merchant payments. Here we have Mojaloop Baobab, which will be the first release built on the VNext code base. The actual date is unclear, and everything beyond this point, to be frank, is unclear. So we have Mojaloop, we've nominally called Meerkat, which will be native ISO 222, as well as some other fixes. But to be honest, almost a year's time is too far ahead to accurately say what will be in a particular release. Now, within the pillar work streams, you'll see that there are two parts to it. There's the solid color and there's the faded part. The solid color is indicating when we expect the MVP or pilot version to be available. And this faded part is when we expect the production version to be available. And that applies down all of these work streams. So participation tools, for example, we don't expect pilot version to be available before the end of PI 25 and production sometime in PI 26. Within yes, FRMS proof of concept, I expect that to be sometime within PI 25, and in fact it will probably come through the COMESA work that's going on. I should actually rephrase that as Tazama. Pillar 2, achieving scale. PISP 2.0s I expect to be ready for pilot sometime in PI 25 and production at the end of the PI, and similarly for merchant payments V2. Pillar 3, connecting to other systems, you'll see that there's been a lot of work streams here. And in actual fact, this actually reflects the story of this PI, where there's been a lot of work going on here in terms of this window. Yeah. There's been a lot of specification work going on in this PI. So we have seen a lot of work going on, which hasn't resulted in an actual release of code, but has been all about the accurate specification and the development of the backlog ready for the next PI. So that's the first one we see here is the G2B Connect Mojaloop integration piece, which is all ready now. It's all completed. In proxies for PAPS and TCIB, you can see that that's only really just started. FX for VNow, you can see that started, and we think that will be available for pilot use sometime within the next PI, and production probably at the end of the PI. Multi-scheme or inter-scheme deployment support, that started earlier, so there's significant specification work there and the development of the backlog, and it needs to move into development, and in fact I believe it has begun development now.
So native ISO 222, that's a big piece of work. Specification has begun, and as Julie and Michael were talking the other day, there is a catalog now of essentially defining the messaging requirements, which can be built into a backlog. But there's a lot of work to be done in that. So we don't expect that to be available really until PI 26. FX for VNext, a lot of work was done on that, but it came to a halt. It was suspended because of performance improvements that were being made in the VNext code base. So it may slip further. Hopefully it'll be able to begin now. Those performance work has been completed. Next gen settlement in the foundation quality product stream. That's largely complete. Well, I'd say 90% complete for the VNext code base, and it should be something that can actually go live or is available for pilot use. I would say sometime probably mid the next PI. However, next gen settlement and its integration with the VNow code base, which is a very important piece of work, we've only just reached the point where we could even begin to think about kicking off that work stream. and we need a lot of volunteers and support to help with that, because it's going to be very important in the longer term. Not the immediate, we don't need it next week, but we're going to need it, and we know there are potential adopters out there that need it. The VNext code base is a work in progress. We had very positive presentation this week on integration with Tiger Beetle, and hopefully that will be available certainly within the next PI. By the end of the PI, we should have a pilot version, but fingers crossed on that. A localization for time zone, not really currency because that's kind of built into Mojaloop, but time zone, yes, that has begun. There is a backlog there, and we expect that to be at least in pilot in the next PI. Language localization, we think, is going to be a little further out. In fact, I could bring the start of that forward, because I know Lewis has been doing sterling work on the specification of that and has begun the work of building a backlog. So I think that I could probably be a little more positive about that than might be indicated here. Down at the bottom, we have the three work streams that I've talked about in the past earlier: performance optimization, core and releases, and platform quality and security. And those are work streams that we expect to carry on forever. Essentially, they're support work streams for the entire Mojaloop project. Down at the bottom are strategic work streams. These are the cross-border special interest group, which is addressing issues around compliance, and for example, out of that came the Mojaloop Foundation's response to the FATF's proposed changes to recommendation 16, and we've also been looking at recommendation 1 proposed changes and a number of other issues, and also our interactions with organizations such as BIS. And at the bottom, we have a new work stream here, new strategic work stream, which is on legal and natural identity-based routing. And I discussed that on, when was that, Tuesday afternoon, we discussed that. And I see that as something that will spawn technical work streams probably in the next PI. But at the moment, that's still strategic. So that's my brief overview of the roadmap. I know that various comments have been popping up in the background, but I don't have visibility of them. Does anyone want to make any comments on that as it stands at the moment? Alan, please speak up.
Yeah, Paul. Paul, this is Kareem.
Oh, hi, Kareem.
So, yeah, I made a comment. I mean, while looking at this roadmap, so I mean, Manzi has actually replied to my comment, so I'll get in touch with him. Basically, I mean, the situation in the last PI has been that we don't have enough to work upon. So we need to understand that if there are any specific requirements which really like any adopters need or go-to-market team needs in the context of merchant payments, and if there are not, then our focus would be on working on. I mean, the same team members, some of the same team members are actually working on FRMS integration, as I shared in my presentation. So we will have a discussion next week with Manzi and team, and based on that, understand. But if any adopter actually wants to contribute or join with any of their feedback, then that would be welcome.
Yes, Kareem, in fact, I raised, I think 2 weeks ago, with the G2M team that we have a fairly urgent need to take the merchant payments work stream to pilot, at least, so we can test its implementation in a real world environment. And I've actually begun working with Phil Green on the G2M team to try and put together some use cases so that we can actually get this to at least a pilot in the very near future. So yes, I'm aware of the need, and like you, I want to push forward on this as quickly as possible. And I'd be hoping that you would take a leading role in that, Kareem. I hope that addresses your concern.
Yeah, sure.
Alan, you've been very patiently with your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So I just wanted to find out whether there is room on this roadmap to add some of the things that, for instance, what we've been working on with R-Switch as part of their own specific requirements that I think could potentially also be beneficial for the rest of the adopters. Mainly what I'm looking at right now is some of the back office modules, like the reconciliation, dispute management. I know these are things that we did talk about a while ago, but that we ended up started to work on because they were part of the business requirements that we received from R-Switch and that we are currently working on, and that we would fairly be done with maybe by November. That is at the end of PI 25, if I'm reading this roadmap correctly.
Yes.
And then also, so that would be basically what I would probably call back office modules that will probably not be really necessary for the switch, but equally important when you're running a switch. And then the other question that I would have is, so there was also another requirements that had to do with QR codes, payment flows. I know there is a level 1 perspective document on this. We've been referring ourselves on this when we were doing the design and proposing this design to R-Switch, and just wanted to find out whether there are some active or fairly passive work streams that are looking into this. If not, we would be happy to contribute on this as well.
Alan, I'm very glad you asked me those questions. That is the whole purpose of the next session to capture those requirements. So yes, there is space. I want to hear these requirements. I want to get them as candidate work streams, and I want to be able to present them at product council and hopefully get them adopted.